Okay, so we're going to actually get into the build of the 5-inch Chameleon Rooster frame. So we're going to take this all the way from unbagging, as it were, and we're going to go through the entire build process. I'm going to put some links for some other build videos, including the Armattan official build video for the Rooster 5-inch TI frame. So let's take a look at it. Let's get into it. Alright, so we're going to have an interesting time here putting together the Armattan Rooster 5-inch FPV frame. Alright, let's start taking it apart and get the pieces out and see what we're going to use. Okay, so in the upper pouch we have the instructions, which are always good. RTFM, it'll save your ass. It will, trust me. So in the top piece we have a number of the components. We've got the titanium front frame components, which are basically indestructible. We've got this back frame component, which I am not going to use, so that's going to go somewhere. We have these little dog bone pads, which I find get ripped off almost immediately, so I am actually going to use my favorite and cheap components, which are these guys. These are much more substantial. These are actually much more difficult to come off if they get torn up. Excellent in terms of their durability, their compression. I think they do a wonderful job. Use these in a number of cases. They get torn off immediately. However, I might go ahead and do the build with these first. Let them get ripped off, and then I will replace them with these. Okay, we've got the hardware bag, which is always nice. Got the back frame component. You've got another piece to actually hold the antenna in place, which I am not going to use because I have the Brain 3D hardware, so that's not going to be used. These are lovely. Granted, I'm not going to use these because I have the Brain 3D red ones with the black caps on them. But these are really good for backups, just in case you need them in another circumstance. Okay, so we're going to get into the bottom of the bag now. Of course, I gave you the lovely Armattan sticker. Got a bunch of those. We've got the plates for pretty much, that's the bottom plate. We've got the battery plate, the upper plate, and a couple other structural plates, including the GoPro mounting plate. And of course we have the arms. And these are really, really stout arms. I'm going to take one out and get a closer look. They're very thick. In fact, hold on, I'll get my caliper out and we'll measure exactly how thick they are. Yeah, 4mm arms. Excellent. So these are going to take some pretty significant damage. I guess the only time that these things are going to break is when you actually impact right along here, but I've got bumpers for that, or you're going to actually get a bending moment in here, and that's going to actually snap them, or you're going to snap it because you're going to have peak forces that occur right where they actually mount to the frame. Although they're replaceable, so we're good to go. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is put the back arms on with the mounting plate. I don't think it particularly matters which way these arms go. I think they're all identical. These look all identical. So it doesn't matter particularly which way you put them on, which is probably pretty good. So let's figure out what kind of hardware we need to mount. I'm going to use this little guy to hold all my extra screws while I'm going through this process so I don't dump them all over the place. Alright, and I know that I'm going to need the standoffs in this guy too. Armattan's really good. They always give you some extra hardware just in case one flies on the floor, you lose one, because it's pretty easy to lose these. I mean, these are tiny. I actually have an entire box of extra screws that I bought off of Amazon for like $15, which certainly gives me peace of mind, but it's nice to have the black ones that match the frame. Got these press nuts that I need to take out. Got to freaking take pretty much everything out of the bag here. Might as well take the last piece out while we're here. Well, that didn't last very long. As I was going through the parts that I needed, I ended up opening up every single compartment in the bag, so I'm not entirely sure that actually helped me out with how they separated these out and tried to make it easier for me It's good to count, I suppose, if you want to count on your hardware before you get into the actual build. I certainly trust the way that they go about doing this. Again, I have extra pieces just in case I need it, but I had to pretty much open up the entire bag. I have a little case here, so I'm not worried about it flying all over the place. I have a little magnet piece here, a little magnet tray here, just in case I need to use that. Let's keep moving on and get this frame together. Okay, that's going to be the front of the frame, because that's where the cage goes. This is going to be the back of the frame. Let's sort of figure out how this looks as we put some of the pieces on here. All right, we know that that's going to go that way. It's going to go that way. This frame piece is going to go on like so, and I guess the press nuts go into that, because these holes are just a little bit bigger than the holes down here. So these press nuts, tiny little press nuts here, are going to go into this guy here. And you can see the knurl on the nut itself, and that's what gives it the friction to keep it from moving against the carbon fiber. And they just literally press right in there. They'll crank down, they'll ratchet in as I put the screw in. Well, I'm going to try to press these in with this needle nose plier. Alright, let's see if we can't put this in a little bit differently. So we know that the 12mm screws are what we're going to need. Let's check to make sure that we've got 12mm here. That's a 12mm screw. So these are going to go in from the bottom, and they're going to go up into here. So let's actually put these screws in. Okay. We'll sit it down here. We'll put the arms on. Needed a little bit of help there. Okay, we're going to put this on here, and then we're going to actually start putting one of these on and see if we can't get purchase on this thing, and hopefully we'll just at least begin starting to thread these things on so we can actually ratchet them down with the hex driver. All right, I'm just getting this on 1 or 2 turns, which is pretty much all I need for it to get purchased. That way it'll pull straight down into the carbon, because that's one of the things you want to do. You don't want this thing to go off at an angle. So to crank this down, we're going to use the 2mm hex driver and sort of crank them down. You can see those hex nuts pulling in. So we can do this a little bit closer. So you should be able to see that hex nut actually pull into the carbon fiber as I crank this down. I have to give it a little bit of good force here. Be a little stout. Let's see if I can do this side, make it a little bit better. You should be able to see those pull straight in as I crank it down. You've got to give it some force. You can see it seat. You don't want to over crank it, obviously. Alright, that's not going anywhere. Alright, so here is the back side. This is step one complete. Actually, I take that back. It's not step one complete. We actually have to put the mounts on here. Yeah, well, that was dumb. Alright, we're going to do this one at a time. Okay, I'm going to put these little nuts on top here just to kind of get them out of the way. Obviously, I'm not going to, I have to take them off to get the hardware flight controller on here, which is not a problem. We're going to go on to step two, which is to put on the front arms and the front cage for the camera. The only problem with this particular part of the build is that I have to take the front cage off to get a lot of the components in place correctly when I'm putting the electronics in. It's good to go through this particular part of the build because you want to make sure all the parts fit correctly. If you have to file something down from the carbon, which I highly doubt out of an Armattan frame, then you can go ahead and do it just to make all the parts fit. As a good rule of thumb, you should always make sure all the parts fit together first before you glue anything together, before you start soldering. Just make sure all the parts fit. This is a classic model building or any kind of construction, building, maintenance, electronics, automotive, any kind of building that you're going to be doing, woodworking. You always make sure you dry fit the components first so that you are sure that the fit is going to work, and then you can go ahead and put all the permanent fixtures together, whether using Loctite or wood glue or super glue or any other kind of step that you just can't walk backwards from easily. Go ahead and make sure all the parts fit together first. So even though you have to take a significant part of this frame apart when you're putting the electronics in, it's a really good idea to make sure that all the parts fit together and work the way you expect so that you have a really good idea and you don't make mistakes moving forward. Well, the front arms have an obvious setup. You can see right here, these notches need to line up exactly because that's what the frame is going to connect against. So these frame items here are identical to the back frame items. So even though you're looking at the back and you're saying that the back arms have these notches, they're non-functional. But they wanted to make the arms completely replaceable, and you don't have to get a left arm or right arm or front arm or a back arm. So there's nothing wrong with doing that. We're just in a situation where it makes it a lot easier for Armattan to cut a bunch of arms and allow them to be easily swapped out for this frame. As opposed to like the one-piece frame on the bottom of the Chameleon. If you break that, your quad's toast. If you break one of these frames or you break one of these arms, you can just throw another arm on, you're good to go. Okay, so I was putting this on and I was thinking I could actually put this piece on. Turns out to make this work right, you have got to put the arms on and then you have to put the frame on, the front titanium pieces, and make sure those fit correctly so that you can get all the rest of the pieces in there. And I'm going to put these 12mm bolts through, which will line up at least these pieces, but you don't want to crank them down because you want to have a little bit of play because of how tight everything is. And that's really tight. It's going to take me a second to get these in here and lined up correctly. Alright, well this is not as easy as I thought it was going to be. See if I just need to turn these in. Yeah. So in this particular case, these nuts will not ease through. Alright, give it a half turn back so it's not fully tight. Just want to see what 12 millimeters gives me here. Yeah, it's 13 millimeters from here to here. So a 12 millimeter bolt should be fine, although it looks like I've got a lot of room right in here. Well, that's fine for now. Here's an interesting question. Did I want to put these bolts on? Did I want to put these bolts on first? Did I want to do that? These sync nuts? And then put this on and just kind of let that whole thing kind of flip together? I think I did. Alright, so let's kind of back this out. And this is part of the adventure here, is going through the process of understanding the best way to do this. And that's kind of the whole point of this channel, is to show you guys my mistakes and how I kind of figured it out so that you can learn from them. What I really need to do in this particular case is I need to put the sync nuts on first, kind of leave these flop, put the sync nuts on, get them going. I'm not going to completely crank it down because I need to have a little bit of give in the front arms here to get the front titanium frame on and give that a little bit of wiggle room so I can line up the holes. But I am going to crank these down a little bit because I want to seat these sync nuts in enough to make sure that they're not going to run out of the way and fall off as I'm going through this process. That's going to be nice and tight, and I'm going to crank these out a couple of turns so that the arms are just moving easily. Now I can get this front frame on. And get it to sit appropriately, and then I can think about getting the rest of the mounting bolts in place and then be able to crank it down. That looks pretty good. I'm going to hand turn these in just a couple of turns, and we're going to not crank these down all the way. Crank this down just a smidge just to make sure we're just a little tight. Okay, alright, so that is step 2 completed. So far this is starting to look like a frame. Alright, let's keep going. Let's go to step 3. Now step 3 is the back part of the frame, which includes these stands. Take these apart. So these two guys go into the back here, and they can only go one way. You can see that there's a difference in height here. See, there's a difference here and here. We're going to put this on here so that they fit correctly, and I believe that that needs to sit down there so that this completely covers that, so that this extension goes down. So if you see that it doesn't go all the way down, then that is the wrong way. So the right way is when you put this on and it makes the nice round seamless edge with the bottom of the frame. Okay, so those are the two 10 millimeter ones. Let's get this on here. Now these I'm just going to put in super lightly. I do not need to have those completely cranked down. So normally in the instructions you want to put this hardware on the back for the antenna and the receiver and the VTX antennas. I'm not going to be using this hardware. I have the Brain 3D furniture that I'm going to be putting on there. I'm going to do that a little bit later in the build, but just so you're not confused, I'm not installing these components onto this quad. and I'm not going to include that in step. So this would be part of step 3, significant part of step 3. I am not using these components, so I'm not installing them. So step 4 is the top plate, and the top plate's a pretty straightforward animal. Okay, so here's the top plate. All right. I am going to put that padding on now. Okay, so the best way to do this is to line it up. And what I'm doing is I'm lining it up with these guys right here, and I'm using my fingers to figure out exactly where my center on the board is. Just very gently laying it down onto the top board, checking to see if I've got that on there straight, and that's not quite right. Okay, perfection here is not possible, but that's on, I think, quite good enough. Okay, that makes that easy. Let's pop this on here. Just make sure that that fits nicely. Okay. And there's 2 6mm, or 4 6mm. We're just going to very gently put these in. I'm not going to crank it down very hard at all. Okay. Okay, well, we got the top plate on. Now we need to put the action camera or GoPro mounting plate on the top here, and that's dead easy to do. Okay, again, we're going to put this little padding on here. This is not difficult to do, and obviously you saw that I can actually pop it off and put it back on as long as you do it pretty quickly. I don't know if you let it sit. I think this glue cures if you let it stay glued on for a significant amount of time. But even if you screw this up, you can always reach out to Armattan Quads and get replacement foam pads for all this stuff, or you can put a different pad. You can just, there's 50 different things that you can do to make this work. So if you screw up these foam pads, don't sweat it. It's not that big of a deal. Okay, so this guy goes on with 4mm, which are going to be these little guys right here. 2, 3, 4. All right. By the way, all of this mounting hardware is going to be Loctite on when I finally do the final lockdown of all the hardware onto the frame. You know, this is just basically a frame build and a fit test. We're just making sure that all the parts are here, that you understand how the frame goes together, and that if you are going through your process of thinking about how you're going to mount your electronics in here, you've got that at least, you know, underway. As you're looking at the frame, you're thinking how you're going to mount things. You know, obviously you're losing a little bit of real estate here, and you're losing a little bit of real estate, you know, front and back with a 5-inch quad. If you're used to, you know, building frames that are much higher in height, and you've got a big stack that you want to put in there, you're going to have to rethink that. So going small and getting a small VTX or transceiver or receiver, or how you're thinking about doing your electronics, or you're getting an all-in-one, you're getting a separate PDB or a separate ESC controller, you really start thinking about that as you're putting the frame together. So if you've made some mistakes in terms of your purchases, you can, you know, rectify that. You can return those components and get components that are better suited for this kind of frame. And this frame actually is suited best for a all-in-one flight controller. In fact, when you're ordering this, you get the CL Racing S flight controller from Armattan, which is not what I wanted for this particular circumstance. It's a fine controller. I've actually had a couple of them, but as you're putting this frame together, you're trying to think about all the different things that can happen as you're going through the build. You're not locking it down with Loctite. You're just going through the basic motions of putting the frame together. and understand what kind of components that you need to have. So the last piece I'm going to put onto this quad is the crossbar for the titanium camera cage. And the reason why I'm putting this in last is because I am not going to use the hardware that came with the quad. I'm actually going to use some much beefier bolts for this, and you can actually take a look at what I'm trying to accomplish with it. So the one thing I got quite a long time ago is a large collection of M3 replacement nuts. And these replacement nuts are quite stout in terms of how these are going to be used. And there's a couple different lengths that I have in here which are interesting from our perspective for this component here. This component is the aluminum crossbar for the titanium cage, which is here. And normally they would want me to put on the 10 millimeter bolts. So which ones are the 10 millimeter? These are. So normally they'd want me to put in these 10 millimeter bolts. And as you can see, I'm actually going to be putting in these very stout 12 millimeter bolts here that are stainless steel. So these are a lot stronger, because if you hit this thing really hard right in the snout here.
So a quick explanation of how I know this. So back in the summer, I was flying my Armattan Chameleon TI around a big old empty field, just flying along, minding my own business. One lesson learned here was never to obstruct the center of your view, as I had with the artificial horizon, as you might come upon something that will ruin your whole day, like a solid piece of rebar just sticking out of the ground. Whoops, you live, you learn.
You can completely destroy the camera because this will bend backwards, especially if it shears the bolt that's already in there. So I've learned to put a much more stout bolt. This helps the structural integrity quite a lot, and I think it actually makes the quad look a little bit better because it's got, you know, the matching chrome kind of finish on it. But some of this has actually been solved. If you look at Armattan's new, the Marmot or whatever they're calling it yet, they've solved a lot of the problems that are inherent in the titanium front frame. I'm not terribly worried about it in this particular copter because I run a fairly high camera angle. I run it around 30 degrees, which is, I got plenty of room in there for 30 degrees. But if you hit the front really hard and you catch this aluminum piece, then you may find yourself in a situation where you've bent this aluminum piece basically in half and it crams into the camera and shatters the camera. If you're lucky, all you do is lose the lens. That's like 10 bucks. If not, you're gonna lose the entire camera, and that's like a $40 loss, $45 loss. But the rest of the quad will be fine because this titanium is basically indestructible. But I put some different bolts in there, I think for pretty good reason. So here I am putting this final front piece in here with these much longer 12 millimeter stainless steel chrome bolts. Let's see if I can get this in here. There we go. Oops, I only took one out. I suppose the one disadvantage of this is that I have to use a different size 2.5 millimeter hex driver for this nut. I think that's a small price to pay for the extra durability that you get with this. Okay, so that's it for the Rooster 5-inch freestyle frame. It is a good looking frame. It's definitely what I was looking for, and it has the kind of capabilities that I wanted to have, not only for the furniture, for the GoPro, for the electronics I'm going to be putting in, but for the overall performance of a freestyle quad.
Hey, thanks for watching the frame build. I know it was a long video, but I hope you enjoyed the content. This, of course, is just one stage of the build, and a fairly easy one at that. It gets more complicated later on. However, the next step is setting up the Brain 3D furniture on the frame. Till then, fly hard and have fun.